Hey guys, today we're checking out the Hover Camera X1, which is basically very similar to what Snapchat tried to do with the Pixie drone. So this is a drone that doesn't include a controller, takes pictures, and is kind of limited in its flight time, but the main appeal, of course, is being a selfie stick without actually having the stick. So we've got both colors here. Yeah, let's get into it. These drones are, of course, like almost the size of my hand. I've got the kit with the extra battery and the charging hub. Also, we've got the white model here, which comes in this like nice little box here. So they both look very cool. Obviously, packaging is very nice. This also is a light drone. It's 120 some grams, so it doesn't even need to be registered in the US. And here's the drone itself, which, for the record, is not that big. Also, not that heavy, and not that crazy as well. Like, look at that. Not crazy, not big, very light, very small. Gimbal, you have a camera on the bottom, 2 infrared lights. Definitely something you could fit in your pocket, and something that's a lot more, I want to say, flyable in a house too. I'm not too worried about this like clipping something and hurting something. Inside the cables, we get a bag to put it in. Awesome. And of course, a charging cable. Let's check out the white one now. Differences wise, not really much. Just different colors, different color batteries, but charge these up, we'll get testing it. So compared to like your traditional GPS drone that we've looked at in the past, this drone, of course, weighs half of a 250 gram drone, so you don't have to register it, but also it lacks some of the hardware of a traditional high-flying drone, which is okay given the target audience, the price, the weight, etc., because it's not really designed to be doing that. This is not a drone that you should be flying high, taking really complex faraway shots. It doesn't even have a return to home feature, and that is okay. This is not supposed to be a, as I said, a long distance, something that you would take far away shots from. This is supposed to be something that is with flying really within eyesight, that you're flying, well, you're technically supposed to be flying within the eyesight anywhere you fly a drone. Something that is at least relatively close to you, that you are going to be taking pictures of yourself or people, and people are kind of the focus. This is a lot more of a scenery, a lot more of capturing cool shots of locations and places, maybe even high up, far away, etc. You have your main central camera, the front 12 megapixel camera that you're going to be using for taking pictures, and the little camera on the bottom here is used for the optical flow. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what optical flow is, it's basically what looks at the ground and determines movement to kind of keep it steady. This flies phenomenal for not having a GPS. This basically does not know where it is technically in the world. It just knows that where to look at the bottom and kind of figure out where this is. This is also why this is such a good drone for flying indoors versus the DJI Mini 3 or other drones that have GPS, is because this won't lose a GPS signal when it's flying through your house or flying through a building. And it also does phenomenal and flies much higher than I would expect based off of just other drones with optical flow. The DJI drones kind of kick off their optical flow in about like a meter or two. This can go like really high, and the optical flow does a good job of keeping it not only in the same position, and then I am not familiar with the hardware that keeps it at the same altitude, but it's also phenomenal, and it does a good job. But that hardware in here is more than adequate for even if you wanted to dip into taking some shots of some scenery. This is more of a user-focused drone, and of course the DJI drones are more of a scenery, location, focused drone with some user-focused features. This is very user-focused with some ability to kind of take some scenery shots here. I was worried about this not having a controller, and the whole user interface with this is phenomenal. It's very functional, predictable, all the things that you want from a drone, especially if you're not going to have a controller for it. You still can control it through an app, but I find that the app is often very, the design of the app is rough, and I was like, I can't really criticize this too much because I couldn't come up with anything better. Like, the app is limited in regards. It's very clunky. I mean, you could maybe switch it out and put the picture in the middle and then have the 2 joysticks on either side. But in reality, you have a difficulty putting both control and, viewing on the same app. So yes, it's very clunky. The way that they did it, at least by, pressing and then it's slowly moving a little bit, that is probably the best way to do it. I just think that it's not entirely working, but I don't really have a good solution for them as well. So I can't fault them too much. They did the best with what they had. So another thing that I was concerned about with not having a controller is basically what happens when this drone it completes its path. Basically, you set it, tell it what you want to do, you hit go, flies up, takes its shot, kind of comes back down. Well, what I was concerned about is like, what happens when it, finishes its shot? Like, if tracking, for example, I had it track me really far away. Like I had it track me down my driveway, onto the road, kind of a really good distance, because it couldn't go back to home. It can't, go back to home because there's no GPS in it. So instead, it actually just lands in the area. Now, it's something you probably want to be familiar of, because say, for example, you're tracking it over something you probably shouldn't be, like water, etc. You don't want it to, be tracking you and then decide to land on that. It says actually not to fly in water, so I mean, that's understandable. Or the way that this drone figures out where it's in space is by looking at the ground. So if you have something that's on the ground that's very not static, very indistinguishable, this will have a hard time dealing with that. But for flying indoors, this is something that you really can't beat with a DJI drone. Maybe the Avata kind of comes close, but this does a really solid job. I do want to talk real quick about the camera though. The camera on here is on the lower end of a lot of what I've seen on drones. The pictures that come out of this, at least I want to say they are 12 megapixels. They're similar to what you would take with an iPhone, and the quality is very similar. I intentionally took a lot of pictures at a really dark, kind of overcast day because that really stresses the camera. It shows a lot of like ISO issues and stuff. And it's a limited camera. It's a 12 megapixel. You can record at 2.7K, 30 FPS, and it's limited in that regard. I found that the overall quality is okay. It's not something that I personally would put on YouTube on my channel, but that's just because I have higher quality standards than the average person. Honestly, the video that comes out of this is more than good enough for someone that's just kind of recorded a quick little event. Also, given the price tag, it competes very similar to what DJI puts out with their first drone, the Mini SE or something, with the 2.7K, 12 megapixel pictures. In no way like inadequate compared to the price range, etc. I just really wish that they would have made maybe a higher end model, or you have 125 grams for this. You have a lot more room before you have to start registering this. Put a little nicer camera, or maybe a Gen 2 to include a nicer camera. That would just be my biggest complaint. Is just that the camera quality, while being more than adequate for the average user, I really just think that maybe a 4K option or maybe a higher megapixels, because this is an awesome camera. It does a very good job, but it's just, when it comes down to it, it is somewhat lacking in 2023, only at 12 megapixels, especially when you have iPhones putting out 50 megapixel pictures. You have drones, the DJI drones now putting either out at the minimum 20 megapixels, and you have like the Mini putting out like 48. So it's just that the sensor is kind of lacking in 2023, but that is also, within the context of this being super light, super small, etc. I do want to give credit where credit's due on something that I was pleasantly surprised with. A is the ability for this to stabilize the video. This is only one really axis gimbal. So when you turn this on, but when you move it up and down, it does not stabilize in this axis. It only stabilizes in this axis, which there's a lot of software in here that does a phenomenal job at artificially simulating a gimbal that is both 2 or 3 axes. I believe it's only 2-axis gimbal, but I want to give credit to that because I was really concerned about, a lot of times these drones are very shaky. The video is unusable. I couldn't really distinguish the gimbal between something that's a fully, like a DJI gimbal with like 3 axes versus something that's versus this. This is phenomenal given the hardware. So another thing I'd like to talk about is the flight time. Now, the flight time has at least advertised flight time of 11 minutes. I found that the flight was roughly more like 10-ish, 9. I'm sure with older batteries, you'll get a little bit less. And that sounds completely horrible when you take into account that like DJI drones here, they're looking at like 45 minutes if you get like this fancy battery, or 30 minutes if you stay under the 250 gram limit. And you take that, 30 minutes, take that flight time in half, and you're looking at, since this is half the weight of the 30-minute flight time, 250 gram DJI Mini 3 Pro, you take this, and that's half that flight time's like 15 minutes. So this is a little shy of that. But also you have to keep in mind, like, this is not supposed to be a fly, you know, really complex, high, weird routes and get a picture of something like a landscape, you're looking at something that's really, that you're using as more of like a quick, hey, I want to take a selfie, or I want to take this cool little video shot, or maybe I want to fly a little bit. This is not something I'd recommend for someone that was trying to get something like of a long flying drone and something that they wanted to control manually. This is something that's definitely more like a personal cameraman. And the reason why I say that is that, as I said, the controlling interface for manually controlling this is not ideal. I don't really think I can fault Zero Robotics too much, but this is very not something that you should really be controlling manually. Between the user interface and the flight times is something you should be, you know, telling it to fly a certain path, pushing the button, having it fly a certain path and come back. And that really didn't end up bothering me, especially with that flight time. Because honestly, you're pushing it out of like just figuring out what you want to do, telling it what you want to do, flying the route, landing, changing things. Between all of that, you do end up feeling like it's a lot longer, which in my opinion, I think that this is adequate, especially with how light this is. Like, I don't think I can really explain how light this is and mind-boggling light when you take a look at like the mini drones that are under the 250 gram limit, so you don't have to register them and you can literally just pop them up like this. Well, this fits in your pocket. It just flies great. The algorithm for the flight controller is also phenomenal. ZeroZero Robotics does a really good job with their flight controllers between the V-copter that they made. Basically, you can, you know, push it really hard. Well, same with this. You can push this can take a beating in the air, and it does a pretty good job getting back to where it needs to be. So as terms of like flight controller, it does pretty solid. For the tracking on this, it does appear most of the time that it tries to follow you through your path in space. So if you like walk somewhere, it tries to follow where exactly you walked, which is a great solution in trying to get around instead of having a bunch of sensors on here, trying to do active tracking, it kind of follows you through a place. And I actually personally found that was really adequate. Things I would avoid though is kind of crossing over places where there's a lot of things in between, like kind of going around corners tightly, or maybe kind of going through low-lying leaves. But this is not something that you have to worry about too much about it wandering up into weird places. This is just, of course, going to kind of follow you through space. Now, that being said, if you start going downhill, I noticed that basically it would then kind of keep an altitude, and it made me a little nervous. It almost hit a tree branch. So this is something that if you set it up and you're on a flat place and you launch it, and even if you're in a very tight, you know, enclosed area, maybe with a lot of trees, if you're just going straight, this will follow you through space and won't have much of an issue. It's just where you're kind of going down, or maybe you're crossing and, you know, have some things in between you, you're kind of going around corners, then this is kind of iffy. The main feature, of course, of this drone, though, is the predetermined flight plans. Basically, being able to push a button, set it, and tell it to go. So all you do is you basically select the flight plans with this button here, and then you just push the power button and it will take off and land automatically pretty much. You go through, you can set the mode between hover, which tracks you in place. You have a like orbit option. You have like active tracking, and then you also have like a zoom out and zoom in. Honestly, all of these are great. They're all able to be configured in the app. Also, you have a custom option as well. So if you want something that's a little bit more unique, you can do that as well. Honestly, you can customize how far it flies out, the speed it flies out, a lot of different things on the app, which actually make this kind of really unique, that you don't have to worry about so much controlling the drone itself. You can tell it what you want to do, kind of figure out what you want to do, and if you have a set shot that you want to do for a bunch of people, you can do that too. So overall, that concludes my review of the Hover X1. Overall, I actually personally like this drone a lot. Something that I find is it's a little tech gadget that I think is more camera focused than a lot of drones tend to be. It's not something that's supposed to be complicated for the end user, something that a lot of people can kind of use without much thought. And I actually personally like this a lot. It's not going to replace your camera drone. If you have one, your camera drone probably has most of these features, especially if it's somewhat modern. But also, this is not priced as like a super high-end camera drone. This is priced as a little gadget that you can kind of throw in your pocket and use. And to be honest with you, I find it completely awesome for that regard. It's really just a personal little cameraman that you can have that kind of records cool shots. It's definitely, I want to say, good enough for the influencer age of, hey, I'm recording some cool little shot or action, and I don't have to worry too much about actually flying, pushing the controls. I can just throw this up and do something. something I'd recommend to people that maybe like a selfie stick, and not something I'd recommend to people that were looking for something that they could fly really high, fly kind of far away. Yeah, basically really high, which a lot of drones, that's the main selling point. This is something that's very low flying, probably below the trees, where this flies right about to the top of the trees before I get concerned. But it definitely flies higher than I also expected for a non-GPS drone, but something that just looks at the ground. It does a phenomenal job getting up to the trees, and I think you could get away with getting a little bit higher. As I said, this doesn't have a GPS, so if it starts getting blown away, etc., it can't come back, and that is, in part to reduce costs. And also, this flies phenomenal indoors, which is something that most GPS drones cannot do because there's no GPS indoors. So overall, something that is more of any environment cameraman versus a drone, which is supposed to be an outdoor, high-flying, scenery capturing device. And I think that this fits the market very well. I personally love this a lot, and it's something I'd recommend to people that fall into that niche, definitely. So thanks again for ZeroZero Robotics for sending me these. I actually really like it. And also, you feel free to check out my other reviews of a whole bunch of other drones on this channel and my review channel. And I hope to see you again sometime soon.